Wonderful. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're now just going to close up the doors and I'll ask everyone to take their seats and start quieting down now. So I would like to introduce the Richmond Valley Landcare Network to talk about restoring subtropical rainforest after landslides across the Northern Rivers.
Thank you. Good afternoon everybody. We're nearly through the second last session. So my name's Tamar, Cohen, and this is Ivy Young. I work for Border Rangers Richmond Valley Landcare Network, and Ivy works for Richmond Landcare Network, often confused, but we're just across the border in northern New South Wales. So I don't know how many of you in the audience are from the region, but you might be familiar with the fact that in 2022 we had a catastrophic flooding event across the Northern Rivers. So we had something like 1,700 mil fall on an already saturated catchment. Led to obviously catastrophic flooding, but also thousands of landslips across the region, and that was a lot less. That wasn't talked about as much as the flooding was. So 4 Landcare networks in the North Coast region, so us as well as Brunswick Valley Landcare Network and Tweed Landcare Network, we saw the impact in our communities and did everything we could to sort of foster, to get some funding to support landholders in that space, because these were landslips that were impacting on natural vegetation, not on infrastructure. So they were falling through the funding gaps. So we were really fortunate to secure funding from North Coast Local Land Services, at first to create some remediation plans for the landslips, so no on-the-ground works, but eventually that sort of led into some on-the-ground work. So we worked on 26 landslips across the region, and we're now sort of 3.5 years on from that event, and this is a bit of a case study on lessons that we've learnt in that time. So this image just gives you a little bit of an indication of the magnitude of the event. We put out an expression of interest and we had people submit their landslips. The dots on the map, the numbers on the map are just the number of landslips that people presented to us. So this is, you know, a tiny amount of actually what happened on the ground. So there were 204 landslips. And if you're good at maths, we did a sort of very quick desktop study to try and work out how much soil actually ended up in the creeks after that event. And this is obviously very conservative figures there. So what causes landslips? So landslips are the movement downslope of rock, earth, soil, and they occur when gravity and other types of shear stresses within a slope exceed the shear strength of the slope, so the ability of the soil to hold on. And while they are natural processes, they are strongly related to land use as well, specifically altered vegetation and water flow. So these are some factors that can increase the chances of landslips occurring on a site. Some of them we can work with and affect, and some of them we can't, so it's very complex. There are different types of landslips, and these are highly associated with the soil landscape of the site. We had all of these happening across the Northern Rivers on different soil landscapes. Slumps, you can see, happening in paddocks, massive translocational slides, as well as these flows which literally act like watercourses where the soil just turns to liquid and flows on down the slope.
So if we think about rainforests and what they need, they have soil that is really rich in organic matter, that is remarkably good at holding on to water. There's a really rich seed bank and seedling bank, and there will generally be a closed canopy. When a landslip occurs, the topsoil and all that humus and water holding capacity tends to get washed away along with the seedling and seed bank. The canopy can be disturbed or removed entirely, and so in short it leaves a very challenging restoration site for reinstating rainforest.
So what did we do to address the problem? This is an example of some of the content from the remediation plans that we had done originally. So we worked with geotechnical engineers, soil conservationists, bush regenerators, and we created these really in-depth plans, including costings of works. Gave those to the landholders, but at that point we didn't have any follow-up funding. So it was literally like, here's something that you might go and get funding for or fund yourself if you possibly can. Some of these, costs range from a few $1,000s to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in some contexts, the geotechnical engineers were just like, don't even go on the site. Too dangerous, just leave it alone.
But across all these reports, there was a common element of remediation plans requiring drainage, stabilisation and revegetation. So if funds and access allows, then it can be desirable to do earthworks. By doing earthworks, then you can reformalise the drainage lines that will reduce erosion over time, and it's going to make the site a lot safer and more accessible. There is a lag time. You're not able to get earth-moving machinery onto these sites until it's dried out a bit, and then that lag will put behind any kind of natural germination that has occurred. It can also tend to overly compact the site that can make it then harder for natural recruitment to occur. And of course, earthworks tend to be very expensive. There are some low-cost alternatives for ways to slow down water and reduce erosion, such as using brush swales, using mulch and strategic plantings. So regardless of whether earthworks are done or not, the aim is to cover the soil with anything that's going to help to reduce erosion. So this might be hydromulching or hand casting of annual grass seeds.
So as well as the erosion control and earthworks, we also trialled different regeneration techniques. So that included just the usual bush regen approach, weed control and hand planting. We also, and I'll talk about it a bit more, have case studies where we used hydromulching. We also partnered with Airseed and explored the use of drone seeding on landslips. It's a new tech and still very much being tested in the landslip context. And then also where there was good seed banks on sites and natural recruitment was happening, we just supported weed control, so undertaking weed control to support that natural recruitment. So the photo, or this one, shows a planting, the hand planting, Landcare planting adjacent to a landslip that was regenerating naturally via assisted natural recruitment.
So here we're going to compare a couple of case studies. There were two landslips, both occurring on red basalt soils in the Lismore LGA. They received similar treatments in the sense that they both received some significant earthworks, and there was volunteer Landcare groups doing community planting days on the sites. So this site had an excavator that reformalised the drainage line and put in a diversion drain at the top of the slip to reduce that excess water shedding onto it. This site, it was estimated over 5 hectares in size, and there was a large excavator and dozer that spent a week basically pushing soil back uphill, reformalising drainage lines, and the soil conservationists that oversaw the works also installed ag pipe and jute matting and core logs to help stabilise. So, sorry?
Yep, I've got you.
Yep, so this is the first site that was mentioned. There was fortunately a deposit of topsoil on the edge of the landslip that the earth-moving machinery used to top dress the site before it left. And then community planting days occurred. They hand-cast grass seed immediately afterwards as well to capture the site. And there's been really significant ongoing landholder investment in the site. In the early days, they were down there most days doing weeding, watering to get the trees established, and overall the site's doing really well. Also in the community planting day, there was a nearby disused bush turkey mound, and that was harvested from to add organic matter to the tree holes. So The trees, we just go back, the trees are doing quite well. There is good success rate there. Whilst they are growing well, they would still not be at a stage that would be comparable to a non-landslip site. The 5 hectare landslip, it's had very varied results. Some of the rainforest trees, particularly like your secondary species, are very stunted. Most are still alive, but they're not thriving. Some of the pioneers are doing really well. Particularly in areas where they're a little bit more protected or there's a little bit of topsoil that's been left, the species are doing better. So the results of these 2 sites does support the unsurprising conclusion that having that topsoil and organic matter really does help to stimulate the tree growth.
So this is hydromulching. We undertook hydromulching on a few sites. Hydromulching is where you get a mixture of mulch, fertiliser, microbes, seed and a glue, and you literally spray it on site and it acts as an instant band-aid that just holds the soil in place, but then also adds that substrate that can promote germination on these really exposed and disturbed sites. So this is just a comparison of 2 different sites. In both cases we used a mix of native seed, tree and grass species, as well as an annual grass, a ryegrass. It was a winter planting. And that annual grass is just used as a quick cover crop. It germinates, it gets the nutrient and biological cycle happening, and then it dies off, and then we get the native seed coming up. So the first site is in the Larnook in the Lismore LGA. The landslip was in a bit more of a protected site, east-facing slope, and there was pockets of topsoil that were left on site. And we got on there really early in June 2022, organised a field day as Landcarers do, and spread some mulch, convinced SoilCon to give us their little hydro mulcher, and away we went. You can see the ryegrass germinated, looks like a paddock, and then that died down. And a year later, in February 2023, we're seeing really quite good re-veg happening there, and in May 2024 the site's looking really good. This wasn't a rainforest site, dry sclerophyll, so a bit more context there. The second site is the big 5 hectare landslip that Ivy described before. All of the white in that picture is hydro mulch, so pretty big deal. This was our throw everything at its site, big dollars. Sadly, in May 2024, you can see the ryegrass did its thing and died back, but we were not seeing as much germination as we did on the other site. Much more exposed site, heavy compaction from the earthworks. We almost cried. We sort of thought, oh, that was a bit of a waste of money. But these things take time, and luckily in preparation for the conference today, we went back and took some more photos. And so we can see that there is some germination of those pioneer species, acacias and stuff like that coming up. Yeah, but patchy and still not as good as the other one, and some spots on the slip are still looking pretty bare. So, yeah. This is just a really quick comparison of planting versus assisted regeneration. So this is a massive landslip that happened in the Tweed LGA. The photos here just showing the landslip in 2022 and then in August 2025, and the trees that are coming up on that site, that's all just natural recruitment, and landholders been really active in weed control, targeting mostly giant devil's fig, and have done a really great job. This is the same slip, just in a different site. They did a hand planting adjacent to the slip, so you can see that there in June 2023, and in August 2025, comparing that to the natural recruitment that's happening, and you can see that that's just miles ahead. So, yeah, it's out competing.
So this case study is actually of my own home. We had 2 landslips that occurred. One was a landslide in the gully, and there was also a flow that was above the studio. Prior to developing the site, there was a diversion drain that was put in place above where the dwellings were to be. This concentrated the water flow, which created risk for, in high rainfall events, landslides occurring, and also increasing the risk for erosion to occur. So that water, the concentrated water, was collected in realm drain that went into a pit and then was piped with ag pipe to the gully to reduce that amount of excess water on the steeper slopes. So there's the realm drain and the pits. We also had a lot of springs all across the slope, and the ongoing wet weather after the 22 flood just meant that the site was just remaining saturated, and that excess soil saturation posed risk for ongoing landslips to occur. So we just used a shovel and created little weirs, and then used polypipe to pipe that water into buckets down onto a more stable part of the slope. And then that water was then available to use to water the tree plantings nearby to help those trees become established. From the landslips, there were really large boulders that had been displaced, and these boulders were at risk of rolling down onto the dwellings. So initially they were tied up with rope to trees, and then as the site dried out, we were able to get up there with rock breaking equipment and turn these really large boulders into smaller stones that have much less of a threat. And then the smaller stones were able to be used in the drains to help slow the water flow. So there's bare ground, the steep slopes and the ongoing heavy rainfall all increase the risk for more erosion and loss of soil. So on the landslips, we hand cast rye seed soon after the landslips occurred to help re-establish the carbon cycle and capture the site. We used a lot of brush swales to capture sediment and to create humus-rich and moisture-holding zones that would then support nearby plantings and natural recruitment. And we also planted lamandra extensively across the site, often in rows across the contour to also help capture the sediment. There was a significant crack that ran from the landslip in the gully straight towards the dwellings, and this posed a real threat of failure in future rain events. So there was a deposit of topsoil nearby that we used to refill the crack, and then planted really deep-rooted trees into it. The side of the landslip and where the crack came out from, we used star pickets and hardwood logs to shore up that and create a more stable environment to plant into. So those trees are doing really well and helping to hold and retain that side of the slip. Thank you. So the site was historically cleared, and it had regrown with a number of really tall eucalypts. They were at risk of failure in high winds, and they also added a lot of weight to this steep slope. So, and there was also a number of camphors that they're not particularly deep-rooted, and their shade makes it really hard for natives to germinate under them. So we did a lot of tree pruning that reduced that weight and let more light into the ground layer. And the tree prunings were used to create the brush swales. So we also used some of the prunings to create pathways, so the site was more accessible, and by being accessible, we were able to go in there and do the weed control. So you can see how by identifying threats and then using creative problem solving, we were able to incorporate those threats into being part of the solutions.
So in conclusion, 3.5 years on, it's really hard to measure success in terms of landslip stability. We have no idea how these landscapes are going to fare in the next big rain event. However, we can talk about revegetation success and define success as just getting natives actually back on site as opposed to these sites being colonised by weeds. But we can also talk about success from the Landcare heart space. We worked with so many landholders in such traumatic situation, and really the biggest success was getting people out there doing something. They felt like they could see a possibility for a future that wasn't as traumatic as they had seen. So that was really successful, and these landholders would have just fallen through the funding gaps. So input equals outcome, and that doesn't necessarily mean dollars equals outcome, but it's time and care, is as important as machines, and considering and working with the constraints of the site. And obviously landholder involvement in the decision making, but also in getting, the hands dirty and, getting trees in the ground to help with that hopelessness. So revegetation, success. We've just found really that if you can, supporting natural recruitment is really the best thing that you can do. Weed control is essential. The subtropics here, summer season, and the site's just covered in weeds, and it doesn't help for natives to establish. So weed control really is critical. There's never enough funding for ongoing weed control, so that's something that we need to address. Plant selection is really important too, focusing on hardy and fast-growing species that aren't going to mind, growing in these harsh conditions, selecting species for their function as opposed to like a pure ecological sense. So in our species mix, we had diversity of root systems, fibrous and deep-rooted things, as well as like nitrogen-fixing species and all of that stuff. So the photo here shows an area that's really prone to landslips, but as we can see, you can see that in 2022 they occurred on this site where there was gaps in the forest cover. So we can only hope that in the future funding the re-veg of landslip-prone land could reduce the risk of failure to the degree that we saw in 2022. And if you want to learn more, Landcare New South Wales did do a 3-part series as part of their Landcare people-led prevention series, so you can check that out on the Landcare New South Wales YouTube channel. That's us.
We do have a bit of time for some questions.
I was wondering about whether you ended up engaging with any landholders who hadn't previously had anything to do with Landcare, and whether you sort of saw, a benefit from, obviously a horrible traumatic situation, but whether Landcare kind of saw a benefit in an increased profile or increased outreach, or do you know what I mean? Did you end up with people engaging with you that hadn't previously?
Yeah, so definitely. So Border Rangers, Richmond Valley Landcare Network, we were sort of the lead organisation, but then we contracted out the works. So a lot of the slips happened not in our region. So then we engaged with the other Landcare networks. But it got a lot of media exposure, and we did have obviously a lot of people register their slips in that initial EOI process. I created a landslip email address basically, so we've got like a network of people as well. We were getting contacted by, the Nimbin Community Recovery Centre or whatever, anyone, because everyone was just looking for help. So there were a lot of people who were initially engaged in the project who had never had experience with Landcare before. But at the same time, because it was advertised through our Landcare networks, a lot of people who made submissions, did know about Landcare as well. But we held a what was the in Malham, like a community event at the end of the funding, where we had really lovely lunch, round table. We had landholders come who had support, and they spoke about their land slips and what they had done and how it had made them feel. And then they sat down at the table with people who hadn't had any support, and they were there at the beginning of the journey still. And you could tell just in those conversations, those people were still like, what do I do? This is too big for me. And the people who had started doing something were like, it's going to be okay, we just need to, and that was really empowering for us.
Yeah, it's very noticeable.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting. On a technical note, how did you go about finding operators for your machinery that had the skills to work in those sensitive areas? Because in some of the areas where we've worked, finding operators who are sensitive to ecological, or just to have ecological sensitivity, not just going to just go in and crush it all.
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, so they were referred to us. We did work with soil conservationists, and so we used contractors that they had worked with, or contractors that were known to have ecological awareness. And so yeah, certainly it's very important to consider. They were local, yeah.
So there's a few elements to that question. It is a really good question. There was a lot of maverick stuff that went down because there was communities who were stuck, and it's literally Joe's got a machine, will go. So we saw some really dodgy stuff as well. From a risk perspective, we actually sought legal advice when we took this on too, because as a Landcare network, we were like, this is actually a big deal. So we had the remediation plans done by environmental engineers and geotechnical engineers, and then on the sites that we funded earthworks, we had those guys on site managing that work as well. So under their own insurances and stuff like that, yeah. So, yeah.
No worries, thank you very much. We're going to have to pull it up there.
Can I just ask one question? I've come to all of your landslide workshops.
Oh, you look familiar. Oh, biggest fan.
I would like to know if any of these recommendations actually got passed on to local councils, because to this day I've seen councils we have continual on Tweed, we have continual landslides on some of the Kyoto Road, and each time I look and it's just sheared off. There's no benches for drainage or anything, and I just think, well, we have all this now know-how and methodology, and does this get passed on to councils? Because I'm sure Byron and Mullen and what have you, they could do some of this, the filters.
We'll have a chat outside.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you wouldn't mind, you can continue that conversation outside. We just need to